Y'all, I told you it was going to be a time of authors. And so this whole month, we've had some really incredible guests. So we've had Barbara Jo Jenkins on talking about her story. We had Camille, who talked about Marsha's book, and you're going to hear a little bit of Marsha's story. Marsha found herself suddenly becoming a caregiver for her elderly mother during the big C of 2020, and just talks about how the Lord really worked in and through her during that time and just the relationship she has with the Lord now. So tune in for this fabulous episode, friend. Hey, friend, welcome to Milk and Honey with Lemon. The Bible says in Numbers 14:8, and if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. On this podcast, we talk about stepping into that overflow that God has for us by becoming those ultimate Proverbs 31 women. Hey, I'm Lemon. I am just like you, sister friend. I knew God had something more in store for me, but I couldn't see a way out of the laundry piles. And frankly, I resented that Proverbs 31 woman. How was I going to live up to the hype? That is until I found out how to really step into becoming this Proverbs 31 woman through leadership development. In this podcast, you're going to find financial freedom, leadership growth, and motivation so you'll be able to do all the things God has called you to do with ease and really step into that land of milk and honey. Welcome back to the Milk and Honey podcast. I'm your host, Lemon Price, and I am so excited because today I have my friend, Marsha Gray Hill, and she is probably one of my favorite people. You guys will know Camille, who she's already been on the show, and Camille helped her write this beautiful book. And as soon as I saw her book, I was like, Marsha is my people. She's very Southern. She's amazing. So Marsha here, I love her. Her book is really about the last 3.5 years and what has happened in America and what it was like when she lost her mama in the middle of that awful pandemic. And so she used this beautiful book to really just help her process her grief and make sense of what happened. And so just thank you for being here, Marsha.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you, Lemon.
I am so excited that you're here. I'm telling you, I texted Camille when I saw your book cover, and y'all, I will link to her book down below. But when I saw it, I was like, she is my people because you are Southern born and bred, right? And so you're my people.
Yeah, definitely Southern born and bred.
I love it. I love it. So talk to me about writing this book and tell me a little bit about your story, my friend.
It was important for me to write this book because in order to get through grief, you got to have a lot of grit. And that's like the title. It's also a book about my mom and how I lost her during the pandemic. She touched everybody's lives that she ever met. She was a giver. She gave to everybody. She was a huge Christian lady. In fact, one of my endorsers wrote that she was the most godliest person they've ever met. It's also a story about me, the lessons I've learned and how I've grown, and also about the lessons that my mom taught me in every stage of her life. It was hard losing mom during the pandemic, but it was very traumatic how it happened. And she wasn't just a number. She was an amazing lady that lived an extraordinary life. And it was just very traumatizing. And I just feel if we don't tell my mom's stories, because she didn't die with dignity. And if we don't tell my mom's stories or other people's stories, we're just not going to learn from everything that happened.
I love it. Yeah. And I love and appreciate why you wrote this book because I think people need to hear it, right? I think, especially the lessons your mom's imparted on you. I know before we hit record, you were telling me your mom was like the most Christian woman ever. And so how did your mom's faith and the things that she taught you, like, how did that shape you?
Gosh, from the time I was born until I met my husband at age 18, I had never missed a Sunday in Sunday school. So that's what kind of Christian she was. But she mostly led by example. She wasn't a cram it down your throat Christian. She just led the Christian life. She took kids to Sunday school that didn't have rides or kids that were less fortunate. She was in charge of all the youth at church, all the plays. She took a handicapped man home every night from church. We were there every night. Every time the doors were open at church, we were there. But again, it was her example. She was such a soft, kind. Even when she was dying, the lessons she taught me in such a quiet way, I'm still looking back on those because she never wanted to bother anybody else and she was always giving to others, but she didn't ever get it in return. And so when she died, I'm like, how is my mom dying like this, God? And she is not surrounded by loved ones, and of all people on this earth, she's the one that should have the most beautiful end of life and the most honored because she just took care of others. And I'm like, how is this happening to her? It was the early part of the pandemic. And so everybody was scared. Everybody was scared, and I couldn't get help, and people were scared to even come walk by her door. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how can this be happening to my mom that gave her life like Jesus did? And she was just that kind of Christ-like person. How can this be happening? She had dementia and Alzheimer's. And so I had planned her funeral for a couple of years because I wanted it to be, I had 2 videos of her life. And I had a Filipino kid singing because went to the Philippines because her whole life was about missions too. And so it was like, and I had, just planned this amazing thing, but it just showed me that God has a different plan. You know what I'm saying? But I just could not understand why this was happening to my mother. And I know it happened. There's a million other people that have the same stories, but it was very traumatizing. I couldn't get help. I didn't want to drop her off at an ER. And I mean, it goes on and on.
My gosh, friends. First of all, I want to apologize that you had that experience, right? That's hard. It's super hard. And I just understand it. And I know the women listening to this can understand and relate. And I was going to talk to you about being the sudden caregiver, but something you said, you're quite God, why? Why? So here you are, you've never missed a Sunday, you're faithful your whole life. How did this impact your relationship with God? Did you wrestle with him over this?
A little bit, but I've also always had faith in God because of my mother's example. And so I knew that, yes, at first it was like hard again. Why, God, why is my mom suffering? Because she really suffered the last few days of her life, really suffered. And of course, I questioned myself, did I do the right thing? And then is it my fault? There was a lot of guilt involved because I could have dropped her off at the ER, but with her having Alzheimer's, it would have scared her out of her mind. And my daughter was a PA, and she said, Mom, if you drop her off, you'll never see her again. And so I'm going off the subject, aren't I? But anyway, so I ended up fighting with the doctor to get me home health. But then one of the nurses at home health almost lost his job because he came, and then hospice wouldn't come. And they just dropped off medicine at the door. And I ended up sending my daughter had 3 little boys, and one she was still nursing. And that was when it was a no to get on the plane. And so she had to get on the plane anyway, leave her children with her husband, and come and administer medication to her own grandmother until she died because I couldn't get the help that I needed. But anyways, if you read the book, you'll see that I realized in the long run that it was a plan from God from the get-go, because my daughter learned how to give my dad, that was a diabetic, insulin shots by my mother when she was a little girl, because this daughter is so much like my mother. And so my mother taught her how to take care of others. And it was just so full circle that she ended up coming and taking care of my mother that taught her so much about caring for others. And so God had a plan from day one. It's just hard to see it when you're fighting to save your mom. It's hard to see it in the moment. My daughter writes the foreword of the book, and she writes about that, how in the end, we had one wonderful caretaker that stayed at the end to be with mom, because my daughter needed to go home and nurse her pump milk for the baby that she left in Atlanta. And so when my daughter and I left too, it's in the book. But anyway, so we weren't with Mama when she died. She ended up dying during the night, but the caretaker said, "Oh no, go rest, go pump the milk for the baby." My daughter writes in the foreword that she struggled at first when Mama died. How can this be happening? But why do I have peace? For some reason, she had a little more peace than I did. And she says, "I know why." She says, "I know that my grandmother would have been saying, 'Now, honey, you go back and you pump that milk for that baby because that's what that baby needs. Don't you worry about me,' because that's how my mother was. She was such a selfless, everybody that knew her. So I really wanted to honor my mom writing this book because everybody, if I write one thing on Facebook or anything about my mom, everybody that she taught Sunday school to these kids, they all go on and on. She touched so many people's lives because I write about the book, the hymn. It's an old hymn called "Others, Lord, Just Others, Let That Our Motto Be." But that's how my mother was. She was just all about others. So I have to tell myself that God had a plan and he always does. I'm a planner and I'm a control freak. My mother was not like that. I'm a lot different than my mother in a lot of ways. I like to think I'm a little bit like her in some ways because I could never be the person she was. But I am a control freak and I really wanted to control every day when she was dying and everything. I wanted to control that whole funeral that I had planned for 2 years. And I'm the one that has the kids' stockings done in July because I'm a planner. But my mom just always went with the flow and she was never scared. She would go to church in the middle of the night to get the Sunday school book she forgot, but that was back when you didn't have to lock the church doors. And I would be petrified, but she would always say, "God's going to take care of us." And my whole life, those were the words I heard. God's going to take care of us. She never had a drop of fear in her body. So I really wanted this book to help others because I know people have a million stories like mine. And I know I want it to be a reflection on mom because mom one always was helping others. So I'm not an author. This is the first book. So I'm like, okay, if it'll help one person, I know that my mom be smiling from heaven because that's what she would want, is to let others know that they're going down, especially those that have walked down the same path that I've walked on. So,
Wow. I love this so much. And just what a beautiful way to honor the legacy that is your mom. Because most of the time, our legacy just lives through our children, and we just pray and we hope that our children do better than us normally. And you're sharing this beautiful gift of your mother with the whole world. And I think that's really special. I think that's
thanks.
really special.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay. So you found yourself, right, as this sudden caregiver, right? Like you knew
Yes.
that your mom had dementia and things. And then with the pandemic and everything, what was the biggest challenge for you as you dealt with that?
Oh gosh, before the pandemic or during it or both?
Both, right? Because I feel like as women, we find ourselves in that situation, whether it's a parent or even a sick child that you're not anticipating. I had a friend go through that a
Yes.
couple of years ago, healthy child, and the next day in the
Yeah.
hospital for 6 months. And so it can
Yeah.
happen in every season. And so how did you deal
Exactly.
with that?
Yeah. I never really expected to have to take care of my mom. You never think about that happening to you, right? And then, but I did for over 8 to 10 years at least. I was her caretaker, and it was a slow progression. But then when she got dementia and she could no longer live by herself or in an assisted living, I had to start thinking about caretakers and then trying to initially find caretakers when you're juggling your own family. I had 5 kids and all these grandchildren being born, and they were in different states. So it was like, how can I do this? And again, I'm a control freak. So I'm like, who can I find to take care of my mom that will take care of her like I will? And you'll never find that. That was something I had to learn to leave in God's hands and let go of a little bit, because you want to find the best person you can find, but they're not going to be 100% like a family member. But the most important thing was trying to find somebody that was caring, loving, dependable, trustworthy. So that was a whole process. But most importantly, when somebody has dementia, you got to have somebody that's patient. To me, that was the big key, because they repeat themselves. They don't know where they are. They don't, if anybody's had a loved one with dementia, they know what I'm talking about. And there's people that don't have patience with that. And so that was really important to me. Yeah. But we ended up finding caretakers that were as good as I think I could find. But it took a long time, because I went through home care agencies, and you just have to be mindful when you're doing that, if you're keeping a loved one at home, that a lot of times they'll tell you they're sending their best person, but it's usually whoever's available at the time. So I had to learn that lesson. I went through several home care agencies. And then I think if you're looking for a home to put them in, then I think you really need to do so much research and research with the caregivers. No matter what you're doing, you got to do a lot of research if you can't physically take care of them every second yourself. It was a hard journey. It was a hard journey, but we did end up finding some good caretakers. One that ended up staying with Mama until she died, and then there was some that got scared and ran because of the pandemic. But again, I've learned that at first I was upset about that, but I've learned to forgive, and I understand that we didn't know a lot back then, so people were scared. But anyway, I'm going off on another tangent. Sorry.
That's okay. Do not apologize. Do not apologize. I love honest conversation. And that I just appreciate your honesty and vulnerability in sharing what you've walked through as a family, because it is exciting that we now get this beautiful book out of it and that you get to share the story. And again, your mom's legacy gets to live on outside of your family tree. And I think that's beautiful. So just thank you again for being just so honest and raw and vulnerable. So I would love to, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but like, how did your faith really help you get through this, right? And get through all of the challenges, finding the right caregivers and even diagnosis, all of those things. How did God get you through it?
Yes, I don't think I could have done it without faith, because it is a very challenging, and I didn't have family near me. So it was solely me. And when you take on a parent, when especially my mom became my baby. So when they have dementia, and she went into Alzheimer's. So when she truly became my child, and you know what it's like as a parent, you are totally responsible for everything that happens to that baby. And I didn't have family, so it was just solely me and God. I had to depend on God, and especially when I was making decisions and trying to be her advocate, because that's the most important thing. I didn't say that, but that's the most important thing that you can do is for your loved one, is be their advocate, because they can no longer speak for themselves, or they're not capable or able to speak for themselves. So if you're not there, they have no one. They're so vulnerable. It's scary. It's scary, the things that I had to go through with my mom. If I hadn't been there for her, I don't know. But anyway, God, I could not have done it without my faith. It was a huge part of my journey and a huge source of comfort and strength when she died, and the grief that followed. And I just had to learn to lean on him and leave everything in his hands, because I would try to take control, but I had to learn to leave everything in his hands. But that's the essence of this book, was my journey with Mom, and with having to have faith and God by my side. He's my friend anyway. Jesus is my friend and my partner. You have to have somebody with, in my opinion, but that's because I was raised with faith, and I just know. I've lived it. And all these little miracles kept happening. If you leave everything in God's hands, and you're aware. I've had to learn that over the last, I grew up in the church, of course, but I didn't, you know how you pray for things, you beg for things when you want God. But I've learned that if I hand everything over to God and I say, I thank Him in advance, and then that means I'm trusting Him. And then if I do that, and then I just let it go, and then I'm aware. If you're aware, then you see all these little miracles happening every day. And that's what took place every day, like when I was fighting for oxygen for my mom. And then all of a sudden, I'd finally get the phone call. And I'd say, thank you. This kid would be bringing the oxygen, and I'm begging. I'm like, will you please bring it first? Because I've been waiting for 3 days for oxygen. And then the little boy would show up first. He said, okay. And then, like, when I was trying to get home, I was fighting with the doctor, literally fighting. And I didn't know if he was going to give me home health or not. My mom's gasping for air. And finally at 5 o'clock that day, I get a phone call from home health. And the lady says, oh, it's the weekend. I don't know if I can send anybody tonight. And then she calls me back. She says, you're in luck. I have a man, nurse that's not supposed to be working this weekend, but he says he'll come right now. And he just ended up, and my mom they always had trouble getting IVs in her. And I started crying with him. And I'm like, you're not going to be able to get an IV in her tomorrow. When he told me, he said, I'll start tomorrow. And I was like, oh, you just don't know. I'm a pediatric trained nurse. I'll bring the tiniest needles. And I'm like, oh, that's a miracle from God. That's a miracle. And he stayed the whole weekend when he wasn't supposed to even be working. So there were all these miracles that happened during which you'll read about in the book, but I'm probably giving the whole book away.
Oh, I love this. My kids call them God nods. Like all the time,
Yes.
they're like, it's just a little acknowledgement from God
Yes.
that He's
Yes.
aware of you and your needs. And I know that I'm personally so grateful for those, because when you're facing something that feels really insurmountable and it's hard, and you're like, God, where are you in this? I feel like He does a really good job of making His presence known if you're open and willing to pay attention.
Exactly.
So I love that you shared that. I feel like we always have it every time we're running late to church, and just happen to hit every single green light. And my kids are like, praise God. Thank you. Thank you for the God nod. Like, we're not going to be late to church now because we had every single green light. And I'm like, but it's really cool to see. You can train yourself to see the miracles that God provides, and
Exactly.
being grateful for even these small things, like in God putting the right people in the right places and showing up when you need them to. So I love and appreciate you sharing this story so much, because I think we need it when we're in the thick of things.
Yes, exactly.
I beyond appreciate it. So if you had to leave everybody with a final piece of advice, what would it be?
About loved ones, taking care of loved ones.
All of it. Whatever you want, whatever God is telling you to leave them, I'm going to let you do it.
If you're taking care of loved ones, because that's what the book is about, then just make sure you're there. Even if you have to have help, you've got to be the one in charge. And don't mind speaking up, because my mom, for instance, was back in the day, you were taught to whatever the doctor said, whatever the teacher says, whatever. You just listen and you do. But I feel like when the pandemic happened, I don't know, maybe I'm lost a lot of faith in the healthcare system. So I think that you have to listen to God, listen to your heart, and do what's right for your loved one. Don't care what somebody else thinks. It's like your child in school. You have to be their advocate. We're that for our children, but I think a lot of times the elderly just get left behind. I think the healthcare system forgets about them. They think, oh, they're going to die anyway. Like one of my daughter-in-laws said, oh, people ask me how old the grandchildren called her Great Nine. When she died, and when I said 91, they go, oh, My mom was a beautiful soul, and every elderly person, they have a lot of wisdom to give us, and they've taught us so much. And I still think in their final days, they're teaching us if we're only willing to listen. But so many get lost by the way because they don't have anybody. And I think you have to be their advocate. You have to just stand up. If I hadn't been there for her, I just don't know what had happened. She would have been in the hospital, and this happened to too many people. They were dropped off, scared to death, people looking at them through the windows. And it's just sad. I just hope that our world has learned from this because it should never happen again. And I think I should have a right that if I had taken my mom to the hospital, that I should have had a right to be able to go up there with her. If I wanted to let's just say it was dangerous, but it's my life, that if I wanted to be there for my mother, that I should have a right to, but instead I kept her home on purpose. But still, people didn't know what to do, and they didn't have choices, and they did drop loved ones off, and that just happened. And I know we didn't know a lot back then, but we know a lot now. So I'm just praying that we have learned from all these lessons and that our world does a better job in the future.
Yes, I love and appreciate that so much. I remember I had surgery at the minor surgery in July of 2020, and my husband was able to drop me off and pick me up, but he couldn't be there while I had surgery. And I have a very protective husband, and that did not sit well with him at all. And so, yes, I love that you have to be the advocate for whatever it is that is going. You have to be somebody's advocate. And so just thank you for this. So where can everybody go get your book, and where can they go find you on social media?
Oh, you can pre-order the book Amazon right now, and then marshagrayhill.com is the website.
Y'all, please go connect with her. She is so lovely. I know you can't see her, but she is super lovely. Please go connect with her. Go follow her everywhere. Go order the book. The book is so cute. Like, I love your book cover. I'm telling you, I think it's the cutest thing. So it is so sweet. It is every bit of your personality on it. And so just thank you for being here and just sharing your story.
Oh, it was great being here.
Awesome. Until next time, friends. Hey friend, what a joy it has been to share today's journey with you. If you found a spark of inspiration or a nugget of wisdom that resonated, would you bless someone else by sharing this episode with them? It could be the encouragement they need to step into their purpose and calling. Also, if you could spare a moment to leave a review, it would mean the world to me. I really appreciate your feedback, and it really helps our community grow. Remember, the road to discovering God's call for you isn't one you have to walk alone. So join me again next Monday for another episode where we'll continue to explore the depths of leadership and the heights of our heavenly calling. Until then, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting in His plan. God bless you, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye, friend.